Hello class, and welcome to the beginning of a brand new week here in U.S. History 1 at Henry County High School. By now you should know me. My name is John Norwood. I'll be your instructor for this semester. This week we're going to start off learning something that's not only important to you as an individual and as a high school student, but also we're going to learn a few things that you can carry over into additional classes on down the road as well as into college. And also, I found that you can also utilize this lesson and the skills that we're going to learn within it, talking about primary and secondary sources, is something that you can use in your own individual lives as you progress into adulthood, both as professionals and as individuals. The purpose of this particular lesson is twofold. In accordance with Tennessee state standards, number one, we're going to teach you how to collect data and how to use that information derived from a variety of primary and secondary sources. And we're going to go over a little bit later about what those are, and then specifically I'm going to teach you through a series of different activities, ways that you can identify a primary source versus a secondary source, because while some of them are going to be cut and dry, they're not always that way. The definitions in and of themselves between a primary and a secondary source might seem clear, but some of the things that in the examples that I'll throw at you to kind of throw you off a little bit, you're going to see that they meet the definition in both, so you'll have to learn how you can decipher both of those. The second and most important thing is how to critically examine primary and secondary sources. Now, this is specifically important because in today's society, especially with the technology that you all have and the technology that you all have grown up with and been accustomed to, you're thrown a lot of information in your direction every day. Every time you open your phone, you turn on your radio, you fire up the computer, the laptop, the iPad, whatever the case may be, you're inundated with more information in a matter of minutes than, say, I was when I was growing up in school myself. For example, when I was sitting in this very class 20-something some odd years ago, back in the mid to late 90s, if we wanted to research something, we had to break out an encyclopedia, or we had to walk into the library, and God forbid we had to wander through the Dewey Decimal System, which was an archaic way of trying to find a specific book that talked about the source or the topic that we were looking to discuss. You have all of that information at your fingertips. One of the things that I like about this particular lesson, one of the reasons why I implement it just about in every single class that I teach, whether it's a standard history class or whether it's an honors level history class, regardless of age, I find that every single student needs a refresher on what primary and secondary sources are, as well as specifically how you can determine whether or not they're credible. So let's look forward to that, and then the objectives I have for this particular lesson, this is what I want you to walk away with. You will be able to, by the end of this course, identify, analyze, and differentiate between primary and secondary sources, credible primary and secondary sources. You will be able to identify those, but more importantly, you'll be able to explain how a particular source is a primary or secondary source. That's the main goals and objectives that I have for you as students as we close out this lesson. Alright, so now that we've started the lesson, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get out a piece of paper and a pencil. If you answer the question, we're going to go from there. So starting off, what do you think, in your own words, give me an example of what you think a primary source is. Take about 10 seconds and write that down. What is a primary source? Now, some of you, I understand, may have already have had this lesson in another class. Maybe you're already in an advanced class, and that's fine. What this is going to allow me to do is gauge where each of you are in terms of understanding what a primary and secondary source is. So now that you've written down an example of a primary source, I want you to give me, in your own words, a general definition of what a primary source is. Go ahead and take a few seconds for that. All right, next I want you to give me an example of a secondary source. Same thing, we're going to do the same two questions that we did for the primary source. So in your own words, I want you to give me an example. So like, is it social media posting? Is it a photograph? Is it is it a movie? Is it just, you don't have to be specific about it. Just write an example down. Next to that, just like we did before, give me, in your own words, a general definition of what you think a secondary source is. Like, what would make you look at something and say, hey, that's a secondary source? Okay. Here's the next step I want you to do. All of you should have your cell phones out somewhere near you, somewhere where you can get a hold of those. I am actually going to let you pull those out in class, even though I know I tell you all the time not to have those out. This is one of those times that I'm going to show you a correlation between how you can use smart technology such as a cell phone and use that in terms of how you can apply it to history, if you will. Because believe it or not, every day that you take pictures, every day that you post something on social media, you're recording your own history, and you're doing it in a way that has never been able to be done in generations that came before you. So I'm going to teach you how important that is. So what I want you to do is I want you to open up your gallery. All of you take pictures. I know, I see you do it in the hallways all the time. I want you to take that phone. I want you to go through your gallery, and I want you to find a photograph that you took. Now, it needs to obviously be a clean photograph. I don't want to see anything in there that's going to get you or I in trouble. So it needs to be like a photograph of you, a photograph of somewhere you were. You don't necessarily have to be in it. It can be a photograph of your family, an animal, an event. What type of source do you think that is? Is it primary or is it a secondary source? Take a few minutes and write that down. Write your answer down, primary or secondary, and then briefly explain why you think it's one or the other. All right, remember, in closing, as we begin to move into this lesson, there's a couple of things I want to remind you. This is what we're planning to do. This is what's going to be on the quiz, and this is what's going to allow me to measure and grade you on whether or not you're successful in this lesson. Number one, what is a primary source? Be able to identify the characteristics of that source. The same goes for secondary sources. What differentiates the two? How will you use those in academic research? We're going to use a couple of different things throughout in activities throughout this lesson, such as Kahoot. We're going to use a program called Nearpod, and then we're going to use some other grouping exercises where I'm going to pair you up with a partner. Once I determine who's really good at this and who's not so good, I'm going to try to pair you up so that you can kind of work with and help one another to get through this assignment. But those are your objectives. And then lastly, I'm going to teach you how to apply this not only to your life as a student, but also to your individual private lives yourself. Because as I mentioned, you're walking around able to record history today in a manner that no generation before you's ever been able to do. And as you get older and you begin to appreciate history more, one of the personal things I like to teach when I teach history is your history. How do you want to be remembered? How do you want to record it? You have the ability for future generations of your family, your friends, grandchildren, etc., to be able to look back on your life and tell your story in a way that none of us have ever been able to.